Thanks, Michelle. It's incredible to see so many of you here on a school night. It's fantastic. Yeah, I don't drink on school nights, so I won't zero there, but don't tell my wife that. It's okay. It's terrific to see you all here today. I do want to begin by acknowledging the people of the Wadawurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded lands RMIT University, and pay my respects to elders and our ancestors and elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations colleagues and friends here in the room today. Just reflecting, we have a lot to learn from our First Nations people in terms of education. For tens of thousands of years, our First Nations people have been educating their families, their kin, in ways that we are only now beginning to understand and appreciate. And things like place-based learning, storytelling, learning circles are things that we should all learn from and aspire to embed in the practices of our education. And in some ways, this Bridge of Hope, Innocence initiative takes some of those lessons and builds on that learning in our First Nations people. So, 10 years. I think we're here to mark 10 years of the Bridge of Hope, Innocence initiative. And I was reflecting on that just a second ago, and it's like, how many Vice-Chancellors have you outlived, Because I think there's been a few. I think there's been a few passing by, and more than a few Deputy Vice-Chancellors. So it's a great honour to be here to represent the university at this celebration. Is there going to be cake that we can light a candle with?
Unfortunately not. Oh, unless there is.
Because I only come to events if there's a cake. But it's terrific to be here. The Bridge of Hope Innocence Initiative has been around for 10 years. It's seen 300 interns.
Close to that, yes.
85,000 hours of work apparently. And I did do my math on that. That works out at about 250 hours per intern, which just between us, Michelle, is a little bit above the allocation from industry. but it's fantastic to see that effort and the contribution to over 150 cases where there has been perhaps injustice done and the need for collective justice. So it's a terrific initiative, and obviously everyone here today is here because it's so proud of what's been achieved here. It's an award-winning initiative. And my reflection is the first I heard about the Bridge of Hope was because part of my role involves seeing award applications as they come through the system, because it's a university, there's systems for all this stuff, so everyone has to sign off on it. And I've certainly seen over the years this initiative coming through the awards channel on the way to stellar success. First with internal awards, so the RMIT Vice Chancellor's Award programs, and then national award. So it has won an Australian Award for University Teaching Program Award. That was only last year, I think. So fantastic. So I know a lot of people are involved here in the work. I know Michelle well. I don't know the rest of you terribly well. Hopefully tonight I'll get to know you a little bit better. And I think tonight there's going to be a panel to help us understand and celebrate these great 10 years. So on that note, you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from people who actually know what they're talking about. So welcome again, it's lovely to be here, and congratulations.
I'm going to hand over to Nino, who is doing dual duties as MC and panellist. And I just have to point out, we've got a little bit of false advertising. Khalid, unfortunately, couldn't be here. He was going to be one of the speakers. And we are hoping he is at a boxing camp and ready for the fight of his life when he comes back in a couple of weeks. Thank you, Nina.
Thanks, Michelle. I might just get all our panellists up. I'll move over to that turn and introduce you all. Good reminder for everyone else. So we obviously have Professor Michele Ruyters here, the Associate Dean of Criminology and Justice Studies at RMIT. and the founder and director of the Bridge of Hope Innocence Initiative, which is, you probably all know, given you hear, but an organisation dedicated to investigating claims of wrongful conviction and campaigning for reform of issues that lead to injustice. Next we have Julie Buxton, who is a barrister, a lawyer practicing in commercial, public and administrative law and criminal law, with a diversity of legal, commercial and policy experience gained across the private, government and not-for-profit sectors. Prior to joining the bar, Julie held senior roles including Human Rights and Youth Justice Advisor to Victoria's Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People and Senior Advisor in the Koori Justice Unit. She has extensive experience across the private, government and not-for-profit sectors, has worked internationally with the United Nations. Julie was awarded a Churchill Fellowship in 2016 to study models of truth-telling and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And lastly, we have Saskia Penn, a PhD candidate and Bridge of Hope tutor. Saskia is a PhD candidate at RMIT, a former intern and current tutor, as I just mentioned. She's driven by a deep commitment to social justice, and her research focuses on histories of police misconduct in Australia, exploring how policing cultures and practices produce unjust outcomes. And as a tutor at Bridge of Hope, she leverages her 5 years' experience as part of the initial intake and as an intern to educate and inspire the other interns, and seeks to help them develop a deeper understanding of miscarriage of justice. I should have started with myself, probably. My name's Nino Bucci. I'm a reporter covering the justice system at The Guardian. And we're just going to have a little panel discussion, I guess, to sort of talk about the past 10 years and I guess a bit of the legacy, but also, I suppose, a little bit looking forward a little bit. So Michelle, start us off. Could you tell us a little bit about why you decided to start the Bridge of Hope Innocence Initiative and what, I guess, were your motivations?
Sure. Is this on? Yeah. Awesome. Tell me if I'm too loud. I think that's pretty easy. I saw one of the early videos of a case investigated by the Innocence Project in America, and it just, watching that stark reality just really resonated with me, and the idea of being a voice for people who are silenced, who don't get to, they just don't get to be heard in the system, and it was just incredibly important to be able to advocate. And just the sheer injustice, I can't think of anything worse, like that feeling of, I think it must be a feeling like drowning, like the system is just so overwhelming. Nobody's listening to you, nobody's understanding, nobody's seeing the facts from your perspective. And for me, it was really a no-brainer. It was really something I needed to do. And had an opportunity to do. There are 2 people sitting right over there. John Walsh, who's the CEO of the Bridge of Hope Foundation, and Vanessa Stafford. And Vanessa was headhunted to start the Innocence Project at the University of Melbourne. And when that closed, Vanessa and John approached me at RMIT to see if we would set one up here. So it was really just a match made in heaven, driven by the same objectives.
Julie, Michelle just sort of touched on the system there. Why is it so difficult to challenge a wrongful conviction?
Can I come back to that? I just want to start by echoing the sentiment of the acknowledgement of the Vice-Chancellor and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri peoples and their close neighbours, the Boonwurrung. And I think it's really important to do that up front, particularly given the nature of the work that I do and that the Innocence Initiative is doing, and the drastic over-representation of Aboriginal people or First Nations people in our justice system, which I can't speak to statistics, but invariably will mean that there is a high ratio of wrongful convictions disproportionately with Aboriginal people. So to your question, why is it difficult to challenge wrongful convictions? Is that the question?
Yeah. And what I guess about the system itself is such an obstruction.
So I think one of the key issues is a matter of human rights and vulnerability. So the people that find themselves, and this will come back to First Nations people and others, but First Nations groups, the people that find themselves initially in a situation of being approached by police, in a situation of being accused, will not have the same access to resources that more privileged people have, and that's sort of the starting point. apart from systemic discrimination and other issues, we can find people in the system that are vulnerable, that don't have access to private lawyers, funded lawyers, even getting legal aid is difficult. They find themselves in a situation, there's a whole range of issues that go along with that they're far more vulnerable to then being propelled through a system that they get caught in. I'm talking about wrongful convictions in this case, so then potentially people that find themselves wrongfully convicted at the other end are less resourced then to challenge those convictions. It's very sort of superficial view, but there's resourcing issues for the individuals. That's a systemic issue that will see injustice in the system when people don't have access to the same A, education, and B, legal advice and opportunities to know what their rights are, to challenge them from the outset, and then challenge them as they progress to the most unfortunate situation, being wrongfully convicted. I think there are other systemic issues that mean more vulnerable people find themselves in this situation. And I think there are also structural issues in Australia whereby we don't have an oversight, like a national oversight body. And it requires initiatives like Shell and Bridge of Hope, an extraordinary project that has been established here. But these projects and the work of journalists, I mean, you've been involved, no doubt will be very well aware of the work that journalists do. It requires the initiative of family members of someone that are advocating for someone who's been wrongfully convicted. It's requiring people, like initiatives like the RMIT initiative, journalists who just get on an absolute mission because they realise there's this injustice and who else is going to expose it, and then the family members. We lack an oversight body in Australia that can be that central point of advocacy that people without means or without education or without access to contacts and legal advice, which is the vast majority of people. I think that's lacking in the system. I've probably gone on a bit of a tangent. I could probably keep talking for another 2 hours.
Halfway through there, you sort of said it was a superficial look at the system, and I don't think it was, but you reminded me of something a lawyer said to me a long time ago, which was that it can actually kind of help to think of it as a literal system, a machine, a sort of an operation where people are kind of thrust onto it. And unless there are things like Bridge of Hope and sometimes journalists or, a means to kind of push that person off that system, they're just going to get caught up in it, and it's just going to keep churning and churning and churning. And that's, you mentioned it was superficial, but I actually think it's a really important way to think of it as an organism almost, or something that's going to just keep going unless there are actually interventions.
Interventions, and there's invariably in numerous cases that no one knows about because they didn't have a family member, they didn't get in the line of sight of an Innocence project, they didn't get in the line of sight of a journalist, and they're still sitting there waiting for someone to help them. So I think it's sort of a very ad hoc approach that we have in Australia to these very serious justice issues.
Saskia, can I just ask you about some of your motivations for being involved in the Bridge of Hope Innocence initiative? I mean, we've kind of set it up here, some of the things you can work on and stuff like that, but personally, why, I guess you were really keen to get involved?
Yeah, of course. Well, I started out as an intern, just like many of you as well, about a little over 5 years ago now. I was so shocked and impressed that there was an Innocence initiative at RMIT, and I was really keen to get involved for my internship because it really appealed to my sense of justice and trying to help people who have suffered from injustice. And similar to what Michelle touched on before, people who don't have a voice to advocate for them. A lot of these people, they've reached the limit of their appeals, they've come to the end of that system, nowhere else to turn, they don't have the resources to employ lawyers, and it's just we're their last point to turn to. So it appealed to all of those things and really felt like my dream internship to work on something like that. And I guess I just never left.
Can you touch a little bit on what it's like to actually work with people who you're trying to help through the Bridge Vote Innocence Initiative? Obviously, Carla's not here tonight, so it would have been nice to hear from somebody who's been through it. But I guess what sort of things did those people say to you about the assistance you're able to provide?
That's a really good question. Like I said, there's often no one else that they can kind of turn to in that situation. And we also don't have unlimited resources as well to be able to spend the amount of time on every single case as we would want to. But we really think it's important to give everyone a fair go, to assess every application and to look into every case, because everyone deserves to have the case looked at. And for some of these applicants, their case has never really been looked into in as much detail as we can do with our amazing student interns that we have, the amount of brain power that we can actually give to those cases. So, the amount of time and energy that goes into reassessing these cases, I guess the applicants don't always see that, hey, we've had like 10 interns working on your case full time for 6 weeks. So it can be sometimes a little disappointing that we can't help them more, and that part of it can be a little bit, we wish that we could actually do more to help them.
We touched on it a little bit earlier, but I was going to ask a question about the media's sort of, portrayal of wrongful convictions and the role the media plays, and I guess how the coverage of wrongful convictions has sort of changed over the past decade. And what you reminded me of there was, I suppose, there's also probably a bit of a misconception about how wrongful convictions work. That's the media's fault and a large part, and probably sort of Netflix and crime podcasts and things as well. There's going to be, this one piece of evidence that some crooked cops left in the bottom cupboard that's
always DNA,
but and this is open to all you guys, but can you maybe touch on a little bit about, I guess, how the media does cover the issue of wrongful convictions? I guess what we get right, what we get wrong, and how that's sort of changed over the decade since you started?
Well, I guess it works in many different ways. I can be quite open about it. We work very well with media. I guess in a sense, collaborated with media to our mutual advantage. That media get a story, but we get the benefit of their investigative resources, which are vast, and they can also put the case out there, to the world at large, which has led to tangible leads for us that we can investigate. It's led to evidence that, or material that wasn't before the court, that no one has heard. That I think, and the students in the room have heard me talk about this many, many times, but you don't know whether or not the crime scene that's presented at court is the crime scene that actually occurred. Because police don't necessarily speak to every single person in the vicinity who might have something to say about that thing. They don't necessarily see every witness as necessarily being relevant. Or they might see a group of witnesses who have seen the same thing, but elect to go with one of those witnesses. But you don't know that those other witnesses might have seen something completely different. So a lot of the work that our interns do, these brilliant interns in the room, is going for that micro detail and looking for, we've told the story a lot, of a crime scene log where someone, a police officer recorded the name of a witness, or not a name, a description of the witness, and it drove, I hope that intern's not here, but it drove that intern almost to the brink of insanity trying to find another reference to that person. And after we got publicity, that person contacted me out of the blue and said, I was that guy. And they had a completely different story to tell, a really important story to tell, and we would never have heard about it, never got that advantage if it hadn't been in the media. So it really does work fairly well for us in that sense. But there's also, everyone's very familiar, there are different forms of media, and sometimes an aspect of a case can be represented in the media in the way that we would not want it to be. It might focus on a particular part of the case, it might represent the person we're trying to help in a particular way, and completely damages public perception about that issue, particularly when it's down gender lines, when it's down race, when it's down any of those fundamental issues that divide a community. Media can make a huge difference. So I guess it's not my place to talk about responsible media, but from our perspective, there is certainly a difference between responsible media, and fortunately everyone that we work with has been on that side, and irresponsible media. And then it's certainly not my area of research, but Greg, who's hiding in the back there, should be on the panel. Certainly looking at the whole true crime genre and how that's shifted issues and how that's created a whole world of armchair detectives who can completely skew investigations, drive investigations completely down the wrong path, target people who are completely innocent, yet expose them to whatever attacks might come through social media, etc. So it's for me, it's a really multifaceted issue. I'd be really interested to hear your perspective.
Well, I'd sort of touch on. I think you're right that there's a lot of different layers to it. I think that there's another aspect to it which I think is fascinating, which is that sometimes you can do what, as a journalist, you think is a really, responsible, straight down the line. You've read every court transcript, you've spoken to everyone who was involved, and you've tried to form a really sort of cohesive narrative that's got all the way through it, and the audience will see something completely different. And so there's another side of which I don't know how to sort of break down, and maybe there's an academic here who can help me with this, but I don't know how we bridge that gap as journalists and as the media between what you're actually presenting sometimes and what people are seeing. And you're right, part of that is the kind of sleuthification of wrongful convictions. Part of it is people I don't think pay as much attention to what they read as they used to, or they skim, or they'll look at the headline and then they'll go off on a bit of a tangent. So it's difficult to say, I suppose. In the 10 years I've sort of been loosely involved with you guys, and we were sort of talking before about a certain person you guys were helping for a while, and I keep getting calls from private numbers, and as a journalist you can't ignore these calls, and the first thing you pick it up and it'd be a very harsh voice. This call is originated from an inmate at Portfield Prison. It's just a recorded message. What have we got? Dozens of those calls, right? So since then, about 10 years ago to now, there's certainly this incredible fragmentation of what we call media, right? And the problem that I guess creates for more established outlets like The Guardian is that there's a growing trust deficit. So, and that's not just with the audience, that's actually with sources and with people who you might hope are going to talk to you about this stuff. But I think there's also a growing attention deficit, and there's not necessarily the appetite for something I just did, which was a 4,000 word piece on a young kid who spent a year in jail for a murder he almost certainly didn't do. And I that could have been a 10,000 word piece, but I kind of had to sort of trim that back, get more to the kind of core issues, step away from things I was really keen to spend a lot of time on, such as the so-called African gangs crisis that was sort of going on around the time and how that had influenced policing and things like that. So it's a really difficult one. I think basically you're right that we can be a big part of the solution, but I also think we can probably be part of the problem and what makes initiatives like yours successful. What do you think, Julie?
I think it's such a... Is that on now?
I think so. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because media obviously has to sell a story. I mean, you're making a story because people are going to read it. So it probably goes back to that point that I was going to make before, or that I made before rather, that I absolutely think the media plays a really pivotal role in exposing some of these injustices, but imagine ones that don't pick that particular media interest because they're not going to be popular story, they're the ones that get missed. So again, I think a lot of these cases would not have been exposed without media intervention. So absolutely vital. But once again, it's very much a selective process, which is not overall a just process about who gets selected to be investigated by the media and therefore gets some assistance via other channels. So
Completely.
Again, it's a very ad hoc process, but I think the media has a vital role to play. Yeah.
Very Chattermouth rulesy, but this story I was just working on, which, you know, the 16-year-old kid who spent a year in prison who shouldn't have, was a South Sudanese Australian boy. The victim was South Sudanese Australian, and there was a conversation I had with someone internally who basically said that they didn't feel as if that, because of the race of those two people, the victim and the person who'd been wrongfully, well, he wasn't convicted, but he'd been wrongfully accused and spent a year on parole, a year on remand in prison. They basically said, look, we just don't think there's going to be an audit for that. So there's also that issue of, you know, and that's throughout the whole justice system, as you touched on at the start. That also applies to us in the media, the types of stories that get told. Saskia?
Yeah, really interesting points. Just on your point about the importance of the media, the role that they play in exposing these issues. You know, in my research on police corruption, there's so many pivotal points that, you know, police corruption has been exposed in Australia on such a large scale because of media exposés of these issues that would continue to be swept under the rug without it. But I think, you know, some of the students that I come across and, you know, I ask what they're reading about in the news, what they're seeing in the news, what sort of things are they, you know, what sort of rhetorics they're seeing, and they say, I don't watch the news, but I watch YouTube. So they're watching YouTube, they're listening to the podcasts, and, you know, a lot of these YouTubers and podcasters, they're obviously not experts, and they're not providing that kind of chronological voice of these issues. That often does get lost in these discussions of you know, crime and justice and injustice. So yeah, maybe criminologists need to engage more in YouTube and things, because that's what the next generation are looking at. But yeah, that can be quite frustrating. You know, their perspectives are being shaped by what they're watching and listening to. You know, that's being produced by their peers essentially, which can be good, but can also be bad.
Can I just ask you really quickly about something you mentioned about discussions there? What do you think is missing from current discussions about wrongful convictions? Specifically, whether it's my fault in the media or someone else's fault.
I guess on the point of like the sort of YouTubers and podcasts, that sort of thing, I find that oftentimes, you know, re-evaluating cases, reopening cases, perhaps relitigating them, like, can often be seen or portrayed as like a reversal of justice for the victim, and, you know, letting sleeping dogs lie rather than re-evaluating these cases. It would be preferred, but I feel like that kind of obscures the kind of wider justice of, you know, maybe a wrongful conviction isn't justice for the victim in the first place, and actually re-examine cases where there are significant issues, you know, would be a greater justice to the victim at the end of the day. And I suppose what's often missing is, well, you know, the real perpetrator is out there. If we don't re-examine these cases where there are significant issues, if we do let sleeping dogs lie, I find that side of, you know, that wider sense of justice is often missed in the more popular discussions of wrongful conviction.
How about you, Julie?
My thought is, and Michelle might be able to correct me if I'm wrong about this, but more, I think maybe what is required, and again, I don't specialise in this particular area, but a systemic look at what the issues are and how we prevent them at a really high level. And that work might be there. Sorry if I'm sounding ignorant.
No.
But I feel like each individual case is incredibly fascinating of its own merit. Everyone's swiped their media stories. They're really interesting cases usually. But what is happening and how do we, at that higher level, make those adjustments that we need to make in the legal system, education, humanity, to try and prevent them? Because they're really probably one of the most gross human rights violations one could imagine. So that's my immediate thought.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the ad hoc approach that you said, you know, it doesn't.
All the people that slip in it, that's
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, this story I was just working on for a very long time, I'm still in that mode, and that's all I'm thinking about. But, you know, one of the issues is around identity evidence, right? And a police circular had been sent out, you know, within hours of this murder taking place, identifying this kid to every person in the force, right? And then they've got all these police coming forward, you know, in the weeks and months afterwards saying, oh yes, I've viewed CCTV and provide independent identity evidence saying it's that kid. It's like, you saw an email saying he was, you know, the main suspect. And so stuff like that, you know, what are the police circulars being sent out about cases? What are they doing, and how's that influencing identity evidence? Like they're little, I guess, sort of bricks in the wall of what could potentially be a wrongful conviction. That rather than just knocking that down when it comes to that particular case, we should potentially be looking at it. Yeah. I guess a bit of a sort of forward-thinking question, then we might open up to the floor. But what are some of the biggest obstacles you sort of foresee, Michelle, in continuing this type of work?
Oh, where to start? I mean, Julie and Saskia have kind of raised issues. That's been a big burning topic for me. So to start, we've had a lot of dialogue about needing an oversight body, a criminal case review body, but Julie touched on it. We've got to start addressing those systemic problems and identifying what those are. And there are many, and they are vast, but there are some really critical ones that could be, I think, addressed earlier. And probably the biggest one, and I come back to what I was talking about before, the case you get at trial is not necessarily the case that actually happened. The facts that you get at trial are curated because the material that police disclose to the prosecution and that subsequently gets to court is a curated case. Someone has made a decision about what goes in and what stays out, and those decisions are influenced by their particular biases, their tunnel vision, their desire to win, any number of factors. And they leave so many gaps along the way. And what we see, so many of the cases, I was talking to someone before about this, so many times we've got, if only you'd just gone another 3 more questions in that cross-examination. If only you had asked those questions or, covered this issue in your final address to the jury, they would have had an alternative narrative to take into the jury room with them. And it's not that counsel got it wrong at trial, it's that they weren't in a situation where they could actually notice it in the first place. Because they didn't have time. They might only get 2-3 weeks preparation. That's not enough time to get to the bottom of what happened. We've got a number of cases where we've had students, and there's some of them over here today, where we've reenacted crimes and taken into account every single person's perspective and every single possible variation. And we can say 100% that actually factually could not have happened. But you don't get the time. It took days for us to get to that point of comparing every possible narrative, every kind of fixed point that you use to orient time, like CCTV footage or a phone call, that, those markers, and then all the action takes place around those. And they don't get noticed because people don't get time to notice those things before it gets to trial. And you can't go back. These are not the things that you can go back and litigate on an appeal. So I can say to a number of people that we've worked for, I know, actually, factually, you did not do this, but the system will not let me fix it. We can't go back and get another appeal. We can't do this because the system won't allow us to do it. So our biggest problem, from my mind, is the narrowness of that post-conviction space. The idea that we got it absolutely right at trial, and then we just close that gap the more the appeal process goes through. Let's open the gap, have a conviction integrity unit in prosecution bodies. Let's make sure we get it right the first time before you let the conviction get confirmed. Then we will save money on prisons, we will save money on appeals, we'll save money on frivolous appeals. It just takes a little bit more money at this end. Honestly, the big problem is not enough legal aid funding and not enough money in the places where it should be spent. And I think I just, that is my big beef. We do not spend enough money on justice in the early stages. And I'll just finish by saying, I get so tired of hearing that the whole point of the process is justice rather than truth. We'll take truth and justice. That's what we're in this for. And yeah, sorry.
I think Michelle is just going to say a few final words and close us off for the night. Well, this part of it.
Thank you. Sorry to get into lecture mode. Tonight was it's really been. This is a thank you for everyone who's helped us get here so far. So I'm just going to start from the glasses at the top. I just got to thank John and Vanessa. It just wouldn't have happened if they hadn't approached us to set the project up. And their support and their connections were just so pivotal in making this a success. So, yeah, it's been an amazing partnership along the years. So thank you. I'm just going to give RMIT a big wrap here. There are very few projects across Australia, and the reason RMIT has one is because it's open to this. It's open to new initiatives. It's social justice is a very big thing at RMIT, and the speed at which we got this up, I don't think you find it in any other place. So my thanks to the GUS Executive Committee. These people are not here, but I'll thank them anyway because they can watch the video. The school that helped us get facilities, that helped us get computers, which was actually quite hard at the time. Helped us get all the resources. Jeff O'Connor, Deb, Mark Newman, all the property services teams. The lawyers that we've worked with, there are just so many. We're working with lawyers interstate, but Julie, obviously. Rob Starry, Tony Nicoli, Peter Breen, Stephen Lawrence, Peter O'Brien, these are lawyers interstate. There's just so many local firms that we work with. And they've just been really receptive and helpful when we ask for materials, which are so important to our case investigations. So my thanks to all the local lawyers who have referred cases to us and let us work with them. That's been fantastic. And I do have to say thanks to all the journalists that we've worked with. And it is, most of these are investigative cases, and it's just been fantastic and very collegial, and we've found that we work very similarly to journalists because ours is a very much ground, from the ground up investigation. So that's been wonderful, and at some stage we'll work with Nino on a case. Looking forward to that. The wonderful Morella, who's responsible for our branding, which is everywhere. She gave us our identity, which is, you just need something to colour us around, and it's been so important to us, so thank you so much. I've just got a reminder here that even though we get salaries, we are pro bono, so, and a lot of, this is a kind of enterprise, and I know there are people here from Beeswax, which is another project at RMIT. There's a lot of stuff that happens after hours. There's a lot of voluntary hours that everyone does because they know it's what needs to happen. So we do contact each other after hours. A lot on the weekend.
There's new legislation.
We do sometimes apologise about not approaching out of hours. The university awards and promotion panels and people who have helped us, if we need the recognition to get going, I'll just move on to about that. So it's been fantastic that we've won. So that's been awesome. The other people in the school, Miranda, other people from around the school, people in the criminal justice team, who have just been so supportive and been with us on the journey throughout. I have to take, this is really weird for us, the team, Greg, Greg, come out. Jared?
Come on, Greg.
Yeah. It's just down here. Yeah, it's really weird for us to be nice to each other and congratulate. It's just not our vibe. But we would be nowhere without this team. Greg just coincidentally happened to start at RMIT with experience at working with another Innocence project in WA. So it was just very timely, and it just wouldn't have happened without Greg's, the Greg factor, who's provided kind of the ethics, the moral core of the project, the student focus and the educational focus, because everybody in here knows that I would just forget. Monique, this event wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Monique. I was just, yeah, I was Monique and Alyssa and Jared. These guys carry the load. They manage my OCD, my idiosyncrasies, and just give up so much time. And it's just been brilliant working with this team. So thank you very much. And our extended team, Scarlett and Saskia and Sam. I don't know too much about that. I just have to think that the students, the student work is amazing so many times, and for the students who are here, the past students, I think what people don't understand is a lot of their work is unappreciated in the semester that they work. And that's part of the deal. So they do a little bit of the work to advance the case and they hand over to somebody else, and if something happens, they're not there to kind of, you know, not get the glory, but, you know, sort of be there for that part of it. And so many times have I gone back to old student work and oh my God, you're so amazing. It was just so fantastic, exactly what we needed. So I just want you to know that all the things that you've done, we just go back to time and time and time again, and these are the things that keep the cases moving. Because a big part of what we do, we haven't had like that big success, but a lot of the work we do is advocacy and getting it out there, and getting people to change their minds and be aware of wrongful convictions. So and they've just been extraordinary, particularly the this semester, of course. Who are there. And I also, last but not least, I just want to thank the people who put their faith in us. The next one, I can't do this one. Sorry, I'll try not to. It's a lot to trust someone with your life, and they are so patient with us. They understand that it takes a long time, that we work on semesters, that it's student driven, that we can't always get back to them. And they just say, trusting in the process, and that is a lot. And their families who are so, I can hear my voice going, and their families who are so supportive. It's a big thing, and I'm sorry.
The final point of tonight, which is, of course, there was one person that wasn't thanked there that definitely needs to be thanked. After, we wouldn't be here today if Michele didn't start BOHII. She is the heart of BOHII. She has kept us going. She spends so much of her time keeping our cases together. She's a great inspiration to me and the rest of the team for her commitment to all of our cases. And I know, as you saw, she takes on the kind of emotional toll of that as well, that, people are putting their cases to us, and she really, really understands the importance of that and takes that on. And I think if we're going to do anything today, 10 years at the end of BOHII, it's to share our appreciation of Michele and all of the tremendous work that she's done. So it was a final point tonight.